They mocked Earth in council. Humanity ended all treaties. The vote that started everything was not even about Earth. It was a routine session on Vora's prime station, the kind held every 3 months to review trade margins and transit rights. 41 species packed into the Great Council chamber. The seats curved in a wide arc around the central speaking floor. The air was recycled and cold, the way it always was on a station built to keep reptilian lungs, ammonia breathers, and humans all alive in the same room. Ambassador Dara Holly sat in the Earth section alone. Earth only got one seat, one vote, junior member status, which the Council reminded humanity of constantly, not always in words. She had a data pad, a cup of water, and 12 years of practice keeping her face still. The session started normally. A Fenhari trade dispute, a border marker disagreement between two species whose names sounded almost identical to human ears. Standard procedure. Dara took notes and waited for the Earth items on the agenda, which were listed near the bottom as always. Then High Delegate Saru of the Vreth Dominion stood up. Saru was tall even for a Vreth, pale-scaled skin that looked almost silver under the chamber lights, eyes that blinked sideways and rarely. He moved to the speaking floor with the slow confidence of someone who had already decided how the next 10 minutes would go. He said he wished to raise a matter of council membership standards. The moderator gave him the floor. Saru began with facts. Earth had held junior observer status for 12 years. In that time, humanity had filed 43 procedural objections to council decisions, more than any other junior member in recorded history. Human delegates had repeatedly requested voting expansions beyond their current single-seat allocation. Human diplomatic communications used emotional language that fell outside standard council protocols. He paused to let the chamber take that in. Then he said that the Vreth Dominion formally proposed a review of Earth's observer status, with the possibility of reclassifying humanity as a monitored non-voting presence, until such time as the species demonstrated the cognitive and emotional stability required for full participation. He used the words cognitive and emotional stability the way a blade uses an edge, careful, deliberate, designed to cut clean. 3 delegates made sounds that Dara recognized as laughter. Not all species laughed the same way. The Branchi clicked their front limbs. The Asa exhaled in sharp bursts. One of the drools simply looked at the Earth section and then looked away, which for a drool was the equivalent of a dismissive wave. Saru continued. He said humanity was biologically short-lived, which limited strategic thinking. He said human decision-making was driven by chemical emotional responses that made long-term governance unreliable. He said Earth's history of internal warfare suggested a species still working through its primitive stages. He said all of this in the calm, measured tone of someone delivering a weather report. Dara wrote it all down. She did not raise her hand. She did not request the floor. She did not change her expression in any way that the council cameras or the surrounding delegates could read as distress. The Fenhari delegation voted in support of Saru's proposal. So did the Asa. 2 smaller species abstained. Orel from the Mavi people voted against it and said nothing else. The proposal passed with a simple majority. Earth's full voting rights review was officially on the agenda for the next session, 3 months away. The moderator moved to the next item. Dara stayed for the remaining 2 hours of the session. She sat through a discussion about deep space relay maintenance costs and a disagreement about tariff schedules in the outer corridors. She took notes on those too. When the session ended, she gathered her things at the same pace she always did, neither fast nor slow. In the corridor outside the chamber, Orel caught up to her. He was shorter than most species in the council, gray-skinned, with large dark eyes that carried the kind of tiredness that came from watching things repeat themselves over a long career. He told her he was sorry. He said it was wrong. He said several delegates had disagreed privately but said nothing out loud. Dara thanked him. She told him she had written everything down. She said it was not the first time. Aurel looked at her for a moment and then looked at the floor. He said he knew that. He said that was what made it worse. Dara told him she would see him at the next session and continued walking. At the end of the corridor, in a small communications alcove, she sent an encrypted message back to Earth. The connection went through 2 relay stations before reaching the Office of Interstellar Affairs. The message was flagged priority but contained no alarm codes. It said they did it again. She attached the full session transcript, the vote record, and a timestamped copy of Saru's statement with each specific phrase marked in sequence. Then she went back to her quarters on the station, sat at her desk, and began drafting her formal summary report. Outside the window, the stars were the same as always. The station hummed with recycled air and distant machinery. She wrote until the light on her data pad indicated it was past the station's designated rest cycle. Then she stopped, set the pad down, and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. 12 years. 43 objections. 1 seat. She turned off the light and let the room go dark. The transcript arrived on Director Vance's screen at 4 in the morning, Earth time. He was already awake. He had not slept well in years. He sat at the kitchen table in his apartment with a glass of water and read the entire thing without moving. Saru's words, the vote record, the species that laughed, the 2 that abstained, Aurel's single dissenting vote with no statement attached. He read it twice. Then he got dressed, went to the office 2 hours before anyone else arrived, and pulled up 12 years of council session records. He read those too, not all of them. He knew most of them already, but he wanted the count. 43 objections filed. 43 times Earth had raised a formal concern through proper channels. 43 times the council had acknowledged receipt and done nothing. The objections sat in the record like stones at the bottom of a river, technically present, completely ignored. By the time Priya and Solon arrived at 8, Vance had a summary on the shared screen. Priya was 29, the youngest person on the senior legal team. She had joined the office straight out of interstellar law school and had the kind of focus that made people twice her age uncomfortable. Solon was 54, heavy-built, quiet, with the patience of someone who had spent 20 years in trade negotiation rooms where silence was a professional tool. They both read the transcript without being told to. When Solon finished, he said, "This is a formal record statement, not informal, not a side comment. It went into the permanent council archive." Vance said yes. Priya asked if they were filing another objection. Vance said no. He said he wanted a full legal and treaty review. Every agreement, trade deal, mutual defense clause, supply arrangement, and transit right that Earth held with any of the 41 council member species. He wanted to know exactly what Earth gave, exactly what Earth received, and exactly what the gap looked like when you laid it out in a single document. Priya asked how long he was giving them. 30 days, Vance said. He said to keep it internal. No press, no council notification, no signals sent to any of the 41 partners that anything was being reviewed, standard legal audit language if anyone asked. Solon said that kind of review would take a large team. Vance said to build one quietly. He said to pull from the legal division, the trade bureau, the science and resource office, and the transit authority. He said to make it look like routine administrative work because as far as anyone outside the room was concerned, that was exactly what it was. Priya asked what they were actually looking for. Vance said he wanted the truth. He said he wanted to know what Earth was actually worth to the people who had just publicly called humanity cognitively limited. The team came together over the next 3 days, 12 people total. They worked in a secured room on the 4th floor with no external network access during active sessions. Every document that entered the room was logged. Every person who entered signed a confidentiality agreement that had been drafted specifically for this review. Priya ran the team. She started with the easy records, the ones that were already organized: trade manifests, scheduled supply runs, annual resource reports. The data was dry and numerical, and it told a quiet story just in those first few files. Earth exported biological compounds to 9 species. 3 of those compounds appeared in medicines listed as essential goods under the Council's own humanitarian standards. Priya flagged all 3. She pulled the transit records next. Human pilots had been running the Dura Corridor, the Ash Belt route, and the deep path through Sector 19 for 11 years. These were the 3 most dangerous transit channels in the region. The radiation levels in each corridor were survivable for humans and lethal or severely damaging for most other species over extended exposure. No other species had offered pilots for these routes. No other species had been asked to. Earth had been doing it because it needed the transit access, and because no one else would. Priya sat with that file open for a long time. She called one of the engineers from the science office, a man named Bode who specialized in atmospheric systems. She asked him to pull the weather modeling contracts. Bode came back the next morning with a face that looked like someone had told him an uncomfortable joke. Earth's climate modeling technology, developed over a century of managing its own unstable atmosphere, was licensed to 9 council species. Except it was not really licensed. The original agreements had used language that effectively made the technology a shared resource with no renewal clause and no fee structure, beyond a one-time administrative cost that had been paid in the first year and never revisited. 9 civilizations were running their agricultural and disaster prevention systems on Earth software and paying nothing for it. Priya added it to the document. By the end of the second week, the picture was so clear it almost felt obvious. Earth was not a junior member of the galactic community in any practical sense. Earth was the maintenance crew that nobody had thought to look at directly because the lights were always on and the systems always ran. She did not share this thought with anyone on the team. She wrote it in her personal notes and kept going. The review finished on the 28th day, 2 days early. Priya sent the final document to Vance with a single message attached. It said, "You should read this before breakfast, not after. The meeting room on the 4th floor had no windows." Vance had chosen it specifically. No reason for anyone passing in the corridor to glance in and wonder what the projection screen was showing. The room held 8 people comfortably. There were 10 in it now, including the 4 government panel members who had arrived from the ministry building across the city. Priya stood at the front with the report loaded on the main screen. She had slept 4 hours. She looked the same as she always did. She said she would go through the findings in 3 sections: what Earth provides, what Earth receives, and what the actual balance is. She said she would not editorialize. The numbers would speak for themselves. She started with the medical compounds. There were 6 biological substances currently exported from Earth that appeared in the supply chains of Council member species. 3 of those substances had no known synthetic alternative. 2 of them were base ingredients in medicines classified as essential goods under the Council's own humanitarian charter, the same charter that Earth had signed in year 3 of its membership as a show of good faith. One panel member, a woman named Adira who ran the ministry's Science Oversight Division, asked which species were dependent on these compounds. Priya named them. Adira wrote something down and did not ask a follow-up question. Priya moved to the transit corridors. She put a map on the screen, 3 routes highlighted in yellow: the Dura Corridor, the Ash Belt route, and the deep path through Sector 19. She explained the radiation profile of each route. She explained the biological tolerance data. She said that out of all 41 council species, Only humans had consistently demonstrated the physiological resilience to operate in these corridors without long-term cellular damage. She said human pilots had been running these routes for 11 years. She said in that time, there had been no formal acknowledgement of this contribution in any council record. She said Earth had not asked for acknowledgement. She said that was also in the report. A second panel member, an older man named Ferris from the Trade Bureau, said he had not known about the corridor situation. He said it in the quiet tone of someone doing the math on what would happen to freight and medical supply chains if those routes went dark. Priya said she understood. She moved to the weather modeling software. She showed the licensing agreements. Or rather, she showed what passed for licensing agreements. 9 civilizations, 9 agricultural and disaster prevention systems running on Earth-developed climate technology. The original fee structure, a one-time administrative cost, paid once, never revisited, never renegotiated. 11 years of free use. Ferris asked how that had happened. He said it did not sound legal on Earth's side, let alone the council's side. Priya said the original negotiators had been under pressure to appear cooperative and non-commercial. She said the language had been drafted to look like generosity. She said it had become structural dependency dressed up as a gift. The room was quiet for a moment. Vance asked her to give the summary conclusion. Priya said, if every treaty were ended tomorrow, Earth would lose convenience but not survival. Earth would lose access to certain imported goods it could produce domestically within a decade. Earth would lose its observer seat in the Council. Earth would lose the diplomatic recognition it had spent 12 years being told it should feel grateful for. She paused. She said that in the same scenario, multiple Council member species would lose access to medicines with no synthetic alternative. Several would lose safe transit routes with no operational replacement. 9 would lose the climate modeling systems their food production depended on. She said the review team had estimated a minimum 18-month critical disruption period for at least 11 species before alternative systems could be developed and tested. Adira asked if Earth's government had known any of this. Priya said parts of it were in various reports and databases. She said no one had ever put it in a single document before. Ferris said someone should have. Vance thanked the panel and asked them to stay seated. He said he had already decided on the next step, but he wanted the room to hear it together. He said Earth would send a formal treaty review notice to all 41 partners simultaneously. The notice would use standard legal language. It would be polite. It would be precise. It would state that Earth was conducting a comprehensive review of all existing agreements, and that no treaty terms should be considered automatically renewed until the review was complete. He said this was not a termination letter. He said it was a legal audit notification, which Earth had every right to issue under the terms of its own membership charter. One panel member asked if they expected retaliation. Vance said the review notice was not a threat. He said they were not threatening anyone. They were simply doing what any party to a legal agreement was entitled to do. He said if someone interpreted an audit as a threat, that said more about their conscience than about Earth's intentions. Priya was asked to prepare the notice document. She said she already had a draft. Vance told her to finalize it and bring it to him that afternoon. He said he wanted to read it word by word before it was sent. He said there would be no errors, no emotional language, no implied ultimatums, just clean, accurate, legally sound text. The meeting ended. Priya stayed behind to pack up the screen. When everyone else had left, she stood alone in the windowless room for a moment. 41 notices, 1 planet, 12 years of patience arriving at a single document. She picked up her case and went to finish the draft. The notices arrived at different times depending on relay distance. The Fenhari received theirs first, 9 hours after Earth sent them. A trade clerk in their central records office flagged it as unusual and passed it up the chain. By the time it reached the Fenhari trade minister, 4 more senior staff had read it, and each one had sent a separate message upward marked urgent. The minister read it and called his legal team. His legal team read it and went very quiet. The lead counsel said the language was clean. She said there was nothing to challenge. She said Earth had full rights under the membership charter to conduct this review. She said the question was not whether it was legal. She said the question was what happened if the review concluded that the terms were not in Earth's favor. The minister asked how long that would take to determine. The counsel said she could have a preliminary answer in 1 hour. She came back in 40 minutes. She put a document on the minister's desk and stood back. The document was 3 pages. The minister read all 3. Then he read them again. He said, "Do the others know about this?" She said the notices went to all 41 at the same time. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he told her to draft a private message to Earth requesting a quiet clarification meeting. He said to use careful language. He said to be respectful. On the Vreth Dominion's home station, the notice reached High Delegate Saru's office through the standard diplomatic channel. His aide brought it in on a formal document tablet, which meant it had passed the protocol filters and been flagged as official correspondence. Saru read it standing at his desk. He was not a delegate who showed much on his face. Even for a Vreth, he was controlled. But his aide, who had worked with him for 9 years, noticed that he read the document 3 times before setting it down, which was not something Saru normally did with routine correspondence. He told the aide to contact the Vreth Dominion's health ministry on the secondary channel. He said not to use the main diplomatic line. The health ministry had received their own copy of the notice separately, addressed to the Dominion's Trade Bureau. By the time Saru's message reached them, the health minister was already in an emergency meeting with his supply chain team. The team had spent the previous hour mapping what the words formal treaty review actually meant for their medical distribution network. What it meant was that the human-brokered supply chain that moved 3 of their most used pharmaceutical base compounds from Earth through 2 relay points to Vreth distribution centers was technically operating under an agreement that was now under review and could not be assumed to continue under its current terms. The health minister asked how long they had before any disruption became critical. His logistics director said that, at current stock levels, approximately 4 months before the shortage would affect hospital-level supply, 2 months before the specialty clinics would begin to feel it. The health minister asked if they had any alternative sources for the compounds. The logistics director said no. Not no as in we need to search. No as in it had been searched before, years ago, when a junior analyst had raised the question as a risk assessment exercise, and the conclusion had been that Earth was the only known biological source for 2 of the 3 compounds, and the third had a synthetic pathway that was 17 times more expensive than the natural extract. The answer had been filed and forgotten because the supply had never been interrupted, and there had been no reason to think it would be. Until now. On a mid-range station in the outer transit zone, the Asa Freight Collective discovered that 3 of their scheduled routes through the ash belt were flagged as pending review. Their authorization had not been revoked, but the legal ambiguity was enough. Within 6 hours, 2 Asa Freight companies had suspended their ash belt runs. Cargo sat. Timelines shifted. At the emergency council session called 4 days after the notices went out, the chamber was fuller than usual but much quieter. Species that had been loudest during Saru's speech now sat with legal advisors visible in the gallery. The Brenkai had 3. The species that had looked at the Earth section and looked away now had their trade minister personally present for the first time in 11 years. Saru sat in his chair and did not speak during the open discussion period. The discussion was not a discussion. It was several species simultaneously trying to assign blame to each other for the situation while carefully not naming what the situation actually was. The moderator called for order 4 times. Order did not come easily. In the Earth section, Ambassador Dara Holly sat with her data pad and her cup of water. She had not requested the floor. She had not sent messages to any other delegation since her arrival on the station. She had answered 2 direct communications from Earth confirming her receipt of updated instructions. Both messages had said the same thing: observe, document, do not engage. She observed, she documented. At one point, a Fenhari delegate formally requested that the Earth representative clarify her government's intentions regarding the review. The moderator acknowledged the request and looked at the Earth section. Dara looked up from her data pad, met the moderator's eyes, and said that Earth's review was ongoing and that all relevant parties would receive communications through proper channels when the review was complete. Then she went back to her notes. The session ended without a resolution, without a formal response, without anything except the sound of 40 species leaving a chamber and heading directly to their communication rooms. Orel found Dara in the station's lower archive corridor 3 days after the emergency session. He had not sent a message ahead. He simply walked until he found her, which on a station the size of Vora's Prime took 40 minutes. She was sitting on a bench outside the public record room, reading through a stack of old session transcripts on her data pad. The kind of reading that looked like preparation, but was actually the habit of someone who trusted documents more than conversations. He sat down beside her without asking. That was one of the things she had always liked about Orel. He did not perform courtesy. He just acted like they were already in the middle of a conversation and picked up from wherever it had left off. He said, "Is this the end?" She said, "Of what?" He said, "Of Earth being part of this. Of the Council meaning anything to your people." She set the data pad down on her knee and looked at the corridor wall. The wall was smooth gray composite, the same material used throughout the station's lower levels, practical and featureless. She told him Earth had not ended anything. She said the review was exactly what it said it was. A review. Whether the treaties continued depended on whether the terms were fair, and whether the parties involved treated each other as partners and not as tiered assets. Orel said that was a careful way to say what he was already thinking. She said she was a diplomat. Careful language was occupational. He asked her directly if Saru's speech was the reason, just the speech, the one session. She turned and looked at him. She said no. She said the speech was the most recent thing. She said it was the clearest thing because it was on record in the formal archive broadcast to member worlds. But she said it was not the first thing and it was not the only thing. She told him about the first objection Earth had filed 2 years into membership. A transit pricing dispute that had disadvantaged Earth-flagged vessels for 3 consecutive quarters. The objection was filed, acknowledged, assigned to a subcommittee, and quietly moved to an inactive status file within 6 months. No ruling, no response, just silence. She told him about the 4th objection. A request for Earth to be consulted on a resource mapping agreement that covered an asteroid belt Earth ships used regularly. The request was technically required under the associate membership terms. It was skipped. When Earth's office flagged the skip, the Council issued a procedural note saying the consultation had been deemed not applicable. No explanation for the determination. She told him about the 7th. The time an Earth medical team on a humanitarian posting was held for 9 days at a Vreth border station, because the Council clearance form had no human physiological classification that matched the Vreth system. Earth filed an objection and a formal accommodation request. The Council acknowledged receipt. The form was never updated. Orel listened to all of it without interrupting. She said it was never one thing, it was a pattern. It was 12 years of being told we were members while being treated as a footnote. The speech just made it impossible to pretend otherwise. It was on the record. It was broadcast. It was voted on by a majority. Aurel said he had voted against it. She said she knew. She thanked him again, quietly, the way she had in the corridor after the original session, genuinely and without performance. He said he was going to write a formal historical record of the last 2 months for the Council archive. He said it was within his rights as an observer historian, a role the Navy had held in the Council for 60 years. He said he intended to title it simply, "The Session That Changed the Balance." She said that sounded accurate. He said he wanted her to know before he submitted it. He said it would not be flattering to several member species. He said it would be accurate and sourced, and he would stand behind every word. She said she had no objection. He stood up and adjusted the small bag he always carried over one shoulder. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had seen on him before, in other corridors, at the ends of other bad sessions. The expression of someone who was tired and honest, and had decided that honesty was still worth the trouble. He said, "For what it is worth, I always thought your people were more ready for this than the Council gave you credit for." She said, "That is what we were trying to tell them." He walked away down the corridor. Dara sat alone for a while longer. The archive room behind her was quiet. The station hummed with the low sound it always made, the sound of systems running, air moving, the ordinary mechanical work of keeping everything alive in the void. Back on Earth, Priya's team had finished the renegotiation framework. 47 pages. The medical compound supply chains now included licensing structures and a 5-year renewal schedule. The transit corridor agreements included hazard compensation for human pilots. The climate modeling software converted into proper licensing contracts with annual fees proportional to GDP impact. The terms were fair. They were the terms that should have been in place from the beginning. Vance read the full document, made 4 small edits, and approved it. He told Priya to send it to all 41 partners on the day the review period officially closed. She asked if he expected pushback. He said he expected some. He said most of the 41 already knew what the review had found because they had been doing their own math for weeks. He said the ones who pushed back would do so from pride, not because the terms were unfair. He said that was manageable. The renegotiation framework went out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, 11 species had sent formal acknowledgments expressing willingness to begin discussions. By the following week, 3 had signed revised agreements without any negotiation at all. Their legal teams had read the new terms, compared them to their current exposure, and advised their governments to sign quickly and quietly. The Fenhari trade minister sent a personal message to Director Vance. It said that the Fenhari recognized the review findings as accurate and wished to proceed in a spirit of genuine partnership. It said the word partnership twice. Vance noted the repetition and did not comment on it. The harder cases took longer. The Brenkai wanted to dispute the weather modeling fees. Their lead negotiator, a small, fast-moving creature who communicated through a combination of clicks and translated speech, argued that the original agreement should be honored in its original form. Priya sat across from the negotiator for 2 sessions and let him argue. Then she placed the GDP impact calculation on the shared screen and asked him to tell her which number was incorrect. He clicked several times. His translator rendered it as procedural concern. Priya said she understood. She said Earth was not asking for anything that was not proportional and fair. She said the original agreement had not been fair, not because anyone had intended harm, but because it had been drafted under conditions where Earth had been trying to appear cooperative rather than commercially sound. She said those conditions had changed. The Brenkai signed at the end of the 3rd session. The Vreth Dominion took the longest. Saru did not come to the table. A younger Vreth diplomat arrived in his place, a slight pale-scaled male named Ress who moved carefully and spoke in measured sentences that had clearly been reviewed by legal counsel before delivery. Ress was not the kind of diplomat who performed arrogance. He was the kind who had been handed a difficult situation by his superiors and told to resolve it. Dara led the Earth side of the Vreth talks. She had asked for that specifically. The first session covered the medical compound supply chain. Ress presented a counterproposal on the licensing structure. It was reasonable in most areas and attempted to reduce the fee percentage in 2 categories. Dara listened to the full proposal, took notes, and then went through it clause by clause. She accepted the fee adjustment on 1 category. She held firm on the other. Ress asked why. She said because the compound in the 2nd category had no synthetic alternative and a 4-month critical supply window. She said holding firm was not punitive. She said it was accurate pricing for an irreplaceable resource. Ress was quiet for a moment, then he said he understood. The second session covered the transit corridors. Ress asked whether the hazard compensation for human pilots was structured as a one-time payment or a recurring fee. Dara said recurring, tied to route usage, reviewed annually. Ress said that was acceptable. He paused and then said, in a tone that was more direct than anything he had said in either session so far, that he wanted to acknowledge something. He said the Vreth Dominion had benefited from Earth's contributions for years without adequate recognition. He said he was not authorized to speak to the political statements made in council sessions. He said he was authorized to say that the Dominion's intention going forward was to conduct its relationship with Earth on terms that reflected actual mutual value. Dara looked at him for a moment. She said that was what Earth wanted from everyone. She said to be treated the way they treated others. Ress said he thought that was a reasonable thing to want. The Vreth Agreement was signed at the end of the 2nd week of talks. It was the last of the 41. Orel submitted his historical record to the Council archive on the same day. It was 62 pages, covering the original session, Saru's speech, the vote record, Earth's review process, and the renegotiation outcomes. The Council received it, filed it, and said nothing publicly, which was the most honest response they could have given. Saru's official role was reduced 3 months later. The formal reason given was a restructuring of the Vreth diplomatic division. Dara went home to a small house in a farming region where her sister lived. The land was flat and green. Her sister's children were 7 and 10 and had no interest in galactic politics. They were interested in catching the large frog that lived near the back fence. Dara spent an afternoon trying. They did not catch it. A junior diplomat from the office came out to see her near the end of her leave. He went over some administrative matters that needed her signature, and then, as he was packing up his case to leave, he asked her what she thought the lesson of the past year was. He said it not as an official question. He said it the way young people ask questions when they are trying to understand something that the paperwork does not explain. Dara thought about it honestly. She thought about Orel in the corridor, about Priya's face when she found the weather modeling data, about Ress saying he was not authorized to speak to the political statements but saying the rest of it anyway. She said, respect is never given by those who think they are above you. It is negotiated from a position they did not expect you to hold. The junior diplomat wrote it down. He thanked her and walked back to his car across the flat green field. Dara stood at the fence for a while. The frog was somewhere in the long grass near the water, invisible and unbothered. The sky above the field was ordinary and wide, and entirely human.